When you're playing out of position as the preflop raiser, you're probably doing one of two things. You're either being too aggressive and c-betting too much, or you're going too far the other way and being too passive and checking too much. And both of those are wrong. So in this video, I'm going to show you the simple framework I use with my coaching clients so you know when to bet, when to check, and most importantly, why. I'll also show you how to start building your own overarching strategy for these spots. So the reason both of these approaches are wrong is because playing out of position isn't just one strategy. Some out of position spots are actually really good for you, and some are much tougher to navigate. And if you treat them the same, you're going to make mistakes in both directions. Let me show you what I mean. If you open from the cutoff and the big blind calls, you should be c-betting a lot. But if you open from the cutoff and now it's just the button that calls, suddenly you need to do a lot more checking. And here's where it gets interesting. If we move you from the cutoff to early position and just the button calls, now suddenly you can start c-betting much more often. So what's changed? Why is cutoff versus button a much more check heavy spot, but EP versus button becomes a spot where you can c-bet much more often, even though you're out of position in both? It all comes down to one thing. You need to understand who has the advantages in the hand. In cutoff versus big blind, you have position, you have more equity, and you have the nut advantage more often. So you should bet a lot. In cutoff versus button, you're suddenly out of position, equities run much closer together, and you don't have the nut advantage nearly as often. So now you need to do a lot more checking. But when you open from early position, your range is much stronger. So even though you're still out of position, you regain some of those advantages, specifically equity and nut advantage. And that means you can start c-betting more again. And once you start looking at spots through that lens, some common mistakes become really obvious. By the way, I've put together the same aggregate reports I use with my coaching clients for these spots, so you can start building your own strategy straight away. I'll show you exactly how to use them later in the video, but if you want them now, there are links below, or just scan the QR code on screen. So let me show you what this actually looks like in practice. Let's say you open from the cutoff of 30 bigs, the button calls, and the flop comes Jack 3-2 flush draw. This is a spot where a lot of players get themselves into trouble. You c-bet your best Jack X, your overpairs, even your sets, because betting feels right. But this flop is actually 100% check for the cutoff. And the reason is simple. You're out of position, you're in equity disadvantage, and the button actually has the nut advantage here. So when you bet, you're betting into a range that's stronger than you think and has more of the best hands. Now let's contrast that with early position versus button. You open and the button calls. The flop comes ace jack 6 rainbow. If you want to check any hand in your range here, that would be a mistake, because even though you're still out of position, you have a clear equity advantage and a clear nut advantage. You've regained 2 of the 3 advantages, and that's enough to bet aggressively. So you should c-bet here 100% of the time. So the mistake isn't being too aggressive, and it isn't being too passive either. The mistake is thinking about out of position as one strategy. Some spots are pure checks, some spots are pure bets, but most sit somewhere in the middle. And where a spot sits on that spectrum comes down to who has more of the advantages. So let me test you on one spot. You open from the cutoff of 30 bigs, the button calls, the flop comes king, queen, 10. What's your overarching strategy? Now, you might look at that board and think, this is amazing for my range. I've got straights, I've got sets, 2 pair, loads of strong top pairs. So you bet a lot. But this is actually a high frequency check. Because while your range still looks strong, equities run pretty close together here. The button actually has a nut advantage, and they have loads of hands that can continue versus a bet. They have more straights, more 2 pair, and every Jack X has at least an open-ended straight draw. So again, the right question isn't, do I have a strong hand? It's, who has more of the advantages? So how do you actually build your own overarching strategy for these spots? You use aggregate reports. This is really taking what I showed you in my 1755 flops video and going one step deeper. And this is where things get really powerful, because now you stop looking at individual hands and start looking for patterns. So let's start with 30 big blinds, cutoff versus button. On average, you should be checking about 71% of the time. If we move to low jack versus button, now that drops to around 50%. And then if we move to early position versus button, now you're only checking 37% of the time. So same stack depth, same spot, you're out of position as the preflop raiser, but completely different strategy. And the reason is exactly what we talked about earlier. As your opening range gets stronger, you have more equity and a nut advantage more often. So you can start betting much more aggressively. But here's where this gets even better. You can filter the aggregate reports by board type, high card, board texture, and instantly see how the strategy changes. And this is how you start building real heuristics you can use in-game. So let me show you something really cool. If we filter for 9-high boards in cutoff versus button, you'll see there's a lot more c-betting. Because when you open from the cutoff, you have a lot of offsuit 9x in your range. Hands like king 9 off, queen 9 off, jack 9 off. The button doesn't flap many offsuit 9x at all. Maybe they've got ace 9 off in there sometimes, but that's about it. So that means you have more top pairs, and that's an advantage. But now let's compare that to jack high boards. Suddenly, the button has much more top pair coverage. They have loads of jack X, king jack suited, queen jack suited, ace jack off, king jack off, and now that advantage shifts away from you, which means you need to do a lot more checking. And that's how you start building heuristics. You start seeing, okay, 9-high boards behave differently from jack-high boards. Monotone boards check more. Stronger opening ranges allow more aggression. And now, strategy starts making sense. You stop memorizing outputs and start understanding the spot. To help you build this into your own game, I've put together interactive aggregate reports for cutoff versus button, low jack versus button, and EP versus button. You can filter by board type, high card, and texture, so you can start building your own heuristics for these spots. It's exactly how I study these spots and the same approach I use with my coaching clients. So download it below or scan the QR code on screen now. Because once you understand why strategies change, you stop guessing and start making decisions you actually trust in-game. So now you've got a way to build your own strategy for playing out of position. The next step is learning how to recognize the big patterns across different flop textures, because this is where most players still feel a little bit overwhelmed. They can study individual spots, but they struggle to see the bigger picture. So in this video here, I'll show you how to simplify all 1755 flops into clear patterns you can actually understand and use in-game.